Joining us now to talk about the latest news in this climate change debate, we're so pleased to be joined on our South Florida anchor desk by Professor Larry Bell of the University of Houston, author of the book Climate of Corruption: Politics and Power Behind the Global Warming Hoax. Also, Larry's a contributor to Newsmax.com. You can read his latest column about how the most recent spending bill could bring relief to rural America, specifically to the cattle grazing there.
Big relief for the cattle.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in a second. It is great to have you here. But let's go back to what Dr. Holdren had to say. What do you make of his comments?
I don't know what's scarier, Holden or climate change. Well, we've had now 18 years and counting of flat temperatures. So I'm ready for some global warming in Houston. It's been a little chilly.
Do you think that climate change here could be the leading cause of some of the most destructive storms we've seen recently?
We've had, what now, 9 years and counting of no landfall hurricanes in Florida. I think that's a record for 30 years or something of that sort. And as I said, we haven't had statistical climate change according to the satellites now for quite some time. It's been 18 years at least. Wow. There's a big El Nino spike in 1998, and then it's been pretty flat.
Well, mindful of that, there seems to be this insistence by some, Dr. Holdren and others, saying that it's humans are causing temperature change, humans are causing all sorts of problems. And as I guess your column in Newsmax.com suggests, it's not only humans, but perhaps our cattle. Could you specify what you're talking about as delicately as you can? And is this part and parcel of this almost insistent pseudo-scientific hysteria?
Well, the bottom line is never get in a crowded elevator with a cow. The White House decided that they wanted to reduce methane from cattle flatulence, from particularly the dairy industry, by 25% by 2025. And the spending bill had all kinds of interesting goodies, and of course nobody read it. It's sort of like Obamacare. But one of the things that was taken out of it was the funding for the EPA restriction on cattle methane as a climate changer. So I think a lot of happy cows going into the new year.
Now, Doctor, within your book, you talk about something called public climate change alarmism. Could you expand on the audience there for us a little bit?
Well, perhaps if you won't remember, but perhaps I will. From 1910 to the 40s, we had a warm period. It was actually warmer than today, and then we had 3 decades of cooling, and until about the late 1970s, and then 1988, about 10 or 12 years later, Al Gore had his big hearings in Washington, and oh my God, the climate is heating up, and we're causing it, and we got to pass the Kyoto Protocol, and so on. And then 10 years later, 1998, we had the El Nino, and we've had now 18 years of flat temperatures. Young people in high school today have never known global warming, so I think you can probably relax a little bit.
Well, of course, back in November, the U.S. and China announced a joint agreement to deal with reducing emissions. But there is a fair amount of skepticism that the U.S. pledged to take specified actions, and the Communist Chinese just announced a promise of an intention to maybe one day do something.
They promised to think about it. I think that's a big relief.
Yeah.
And that wasn't really the U.S., that was, I think, our president that made that commitment. And I don't believe the Congress is, and we have a new Congress, is going to take too kindly to that.
Well, but it does point out what goes on in Washington with these debates. You write with some degree of tongue-in-cheek for Newsmax.com about bovine flatulence and the absurdity of the EPA trying to regulate bovine flatulence, or citing it as a problem. But all the spending that this president wants to do, and through executive order or presidential memos, empower the EPA. Did Congress, in this spending bill and agreeing to long-term spending in virtually every area, save Homeland Security and immigration, did they essentially allow this president to move forward with all of his initiatives, no matter how costly in the realm of, quote, climate change?
Well, absolutely, not just climate change, but we've seen with executive orders any number of executive orders, and then you have all of the alphabet soup agencies that fall under the executive, the EPA and Fish and Wildlife Service and so on. And also another item that was struck from the spending bill with the rider was the fact that the EPA was going to regulate farm ponds as causing pollution. And it was interesting, they did under an old Commerce Clause that the farm pond regulation was under navigable waterways. So if you're going to create a watering hole for your farm, make sure there aren't any battleships in it.
Well, then the other absurdity of that overregulation, we only have a minute left. When we say farm ponds, there were those who were saying that the regulations proposed not really ponds, but something as slight as a puddle.
Or a potential pond, if there was a dip and the water could, and rain could fall in it and it could get into a creek that would go into a river and it would cross a state line, then suddenly we're now into interstate commerce in the EPA. It's a little bit overboard.
A little bit overboard, and we appreciate you addressing the topic with reason and a fair degree of humor. Professor Larry Bell, University of Houston, again, the author of the book, Climate of Corruption, Politics and Power Behind the Global Warming Hoax. Let me say that right. I can get in trouble mispronouncing that. America's Forum is set to continue here on Newsmax TV following this Newsmax Now update.